What would you do if helping a stranger with just $60 at a gas station led to black SUVs outside your home the next morning, and an offer to change your life forever? This is the story of Danielle Brooks, a nurse from Alabama, who learned how one small act of kindness could rewrite her family's destiny. Under the dim glow of flickering streetlights, the night in Birmingham felt heavier than usual. Danielle Brooks, 27 years old, slid into her beat-up sedan after finishing another grueling double shift at the hospital. Her body ached, her eyes burned, and yet her mind refused to rest. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, waiting. For her younger brother Caleb needed money for school supplies, and her grandmother, Louise's medications had just drained what little she had left in her bank account. She rubbed her temples, whispering to herself that she just had to keep pushing. That's what she always did, push forward, no matter how heavy life became. She pulled into a quiet gas station, the type where fluorescent lights buzzed against the stillness of the night. As she stepped out to pump gas, she noticed a man at the next pump over. He was pacing, muttering, and repeatedly patting his pockets in frustration. He was tall, dressed sharply even at this late hour, but something about his movements gave him away. He was stranded. Danielle glanced over, debating whether to mind her business or to say something. She knew what it felt like to be stuck, to feel helpless, and that memory pulled at her. "Everything all right?" she asked softly, half hoping he would wave her off. The man looked up, his expression tense but not unkind. I can't find my wallet. I must have dropped it somewhere. My car's nearly out of gas and I've got nothing on me right now." He forced a small laugh, embarrassed. "Wouldn't believe me if I told you the day I've had." Danielle didn't hesitate long. Her own gas tank wasn't even half full, but she opened her purse, fingers brushing past a few crumpled bills she had carefully saved for groceries. $60. That was all she could spare. She handed it to him without ceremony, pushing it into his palm before he could argue. "Here, just get yourself home," she said quickly. The man's eyes widened. "No, I can't take this from you. At least let me—" She shook her head, firmly. "Don't worry about it. Just pay it forward, all right?" She smiled faintly, not giving him the chance to protest further. The man stood frozen, staring at her as though she had done something extraordinary. But to Danielle, it wasn't. It was just what people should do, help when they could. She turned back to her car, filled her own tank only halfway, and drove off into the night. What Danielle didn't notice, parked in the shadow of a nearby building, was a sleek black SUV. Its tinted windows concealed the people inside, but eyes were fixed on her every move, watching the quiet exchange that had just taken place. The engine purred softly, and when Danielle pulled out of the lot, the SUV waited a beat before easing into the darkness, tracking her route from a careful distance. Back at home, the small apartment felt colder than usual. Caleb had fallen asleep. On the couch, his textbooks open beside him, while Louise sat quietly in her chair, knitting with tired hands. Danielle slipped inside, setting her bag down, and tried to hide the exhaustion written across her face. Louise glanced up, noticing. "More than Danielle wanted her to. Long night, baby?" the old woman asked. Danielle forced a smile, kissing her grandmother's cheek. "Just the usual." But Louise could sense the truth. She always did. Danielle headed to the kitchen, pulling out the stack of envelopes that seemed to grow heavier by the day. Rent overdue, power bill threatening shutoff, Caleb's school fees marked urgent. She swallowed the lump in her throat and quietly shoved them aside, not wanting her grandmother to see. "You gave away money again, didn't you?" Louise's voice floated in from the living room, calm but knowing. Danielle froze, glancing back guiltily. "It wasn't much. Just someone needed help." Louise shook her head slowly, setting her knitting down. "Your heart is too big, Danielle. That's both a blessing and a curse. You can't pour from an empty cup, baby. One day, all that giving might leave you with nothing. Danielle sat down beside her, leaning against the worn arm of the chair. I couldn't just stand there, Grandma. He was stranded. $60. It's not the end of the world. Louise sighed, brushing Danielle's hair gently like she did when she was a child. Maybe not, but don't forget, you've got your own world to take care of. Later that night, when the apartment was quiet and the city outside had drifted into silence, Danielle lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. She thought of the man at the gas station, the look on his face. When she handed him the money, the way he seemed almost stunned by her gesture, she wondered if he'd be all right, if he would ever pay it forward like she asked. Then she shook the thought away. To her, it was nothing more than a small kindness in a world that didn't see enough of it. As her eyes finally grew heavy, Danielle had no way of knowing that the moment she had dismissed so easily was about to set into motion something far greater than she could ever imagine. For now, she simply believed she would never see that man again. Morning light crept through the blinds of Danielle's bedroom, painting thin lines across the worn quilt pulled over her. She stirred awake not to the sound of her alarm, but to a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the walls of the small apartment. At first, she thought it was construction or perhaps a delivery truck. But as the sound grew louder, closer, and multiplied, curiosity forced her from bed. She padded to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and froze. A convoy of sleek black SUVs, shiny, polished, and menacingly out of place, rolled slowly down her modest street. Engines hummed in unison, tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. Neighbors stepped onto porches in their robes, clutching coffee cups, whispering to each other. Children pressed their faces to windows, eyes wide. The sight was unlike anything their quiet neighborhood had ever seen. Danielle's heart thudded in her chest. The vehicles came to a halt directly in front of her building, their doors opening with practiced precision. Suited men stepped out. Tall and broad-shouldered, their movements efficient, their eyes scanning the area with the alertness of bodyguards. They looked more like an entourage that belonged outside a presidential motorcade, not on a struggling nurse's street. Louise shuffled into the hallway, frowning, while Caleb bolted from his room still in pajamas, practically buzzing with excitement. "Whoa," he whispered, pressing against the window. "Who are they here for? The president?" But Danielle had already guessed, though her mind struggled to believe it. The gas station man. It had to be. Moments later, a figure emerged from the middle SUV. The transformation was startling. Gone was the stranded, slightly disheveled man from the night before. In his place stood William, hair neatly styled, tailored suit fitting him, like a second skin, polished shoes gleaming against the pavement. He walked with calm authority, a quiet confidence that immediately drew every pair of eyes on the block. People whispered, phones lifted to record the surreal scene. And then he looked up, straight at her window. Danielle staggered back as though caught doing something wrong, her pulse racing. A knock echoed at the door, firm but polite. Louise frowned, clearly uneasy. Caleb nearly tripped over himself in his eagerness to open it, but Danielle stopped him with a raised hand. She hesitated for a long moment before finally pulling the door wide. There he was, William, no longer just a man in need, but someone who clearly carried the weight of influence, power, and wealth. His expression softened when he saw her, and he offered a respectful nod. "Miss Brooks, may I come in?" Her throat felt dry. Neighbors' eyes burned from across the street and phones continued to record. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing him and only him to enter. The suited men remained outside, standing sentinel. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Louise sat straighter in her chair, eyes sharp with suspicion, while Caleb hovered nearby, practically glowing with awe. Danielle folded her arms, trying to mask. her unease. William took in the modest living room with quiet respect, not a hint of judgment in his expression. Finally, he turned to her. "I owe you more than gratitude for last night. You treated me like a person, not a title, not a name. That's rare in my world." Danielle blinked, trying to process his words. Who exactly are you?" He offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "William Harrington, businessman, investor. Some would use the word billionaire, though. I dislike labels like that. What matters is, I'm someone people usually treat differently. Except you." Louise crossed her arms, unimpressed. "People don't just show up in convoys to say thank you." William chuckled softly, acknowledging her sharpness. Then his gaze returned to Danielle. "I'm here because I'd like to give something back. Not as charity, not as pity, but as balance. You helped me when you didn't have to. I want to help you now." Danielle felt her stomach knot. "Help me how?" He spoke calmly, as if offering something simple. "Support for your education. Coverage for Caleb's schooling. Medical costs for your grandmother. No strings attached." Caleb's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" he blurted, almost bouncing on his toes. Louise narrowed her eyes, still unconvinced. Danielle, caught between disbelief and suspicion, shook her head. "I can't accept that. I barely know you, and I don't want anyone's charity." William's expression softened. "This isn't charity. It's balance. You gave me something priceless last night, kindness without condition. Let me return that, on a scale I'm able to. Nothing more." For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Louise tapped her fingers against the armrest. Caleb looked like he might explode with hope, and Danielle fought to steady her breath. Her instincts screamed to refuse, yet part of her longed to imagine what life might be like if she said yes. Sensing her conflict, William reached into his jacket and drew out a simple card. He placed it gently on the coffee table, sliding it toward her. "I won't pressure you. Call me when you're ready. Tomorrow, a month from now, even a year, the offer will stand." With that, he gave a polite nod, then stepped back toward the door. Danielle followed numbly, watching as he rejoined his convoy. The suited men moved in practiced unison, doors shutting, engines rumbling back to life. Within moments, the street was empty again, except for the awestruck neighbors whispering outside. Inside the apartment, Caleb rushed to the table, picking up the card as though it were treasure. Louise remained silent, her sharp eyes fixed on Danielle. And Danielle, heart pounding, stared at the small rectangle of cardstock in her brother's hands. Knowing her life had just been offered a chance at transformation, she could barely comprehend. The rest of that day felt heavier than any double shift Danielle had ever worked. From the moment the convoy of black SUVs disappeared down her street, her phone buzzed non-stop. Neighbors, who had never bothered to learn her name, suddenly texted or called, asking what billionaire had visited her home and why. Co-workers at the hospital sent laughing messages, some teasing, others suspicious, as if she had somehow stumbled into a secret life they couldn't imagine her living. And through it all, Caleb hovered close by, unable to contain his excitement. He begged her to accept the offer, painting pictures of a future where his school was paid for, her tuition was no longer a weight, and their grandmother's medicines didn't mean empty cupboards. His voice was urgent, hopeful, almost desperate. "This is it, Danny," he said again and again. "This is the chance we've been waiting for." But Danielle couldn't quiet the unease gnawing at her chest. She went about her chores with a distracted mind, folding laundry she didn't remember washing, staring at bills until the numbers blurred together. Every time she looked at William's card on the table, her heart beat faster. Was this a blessing? Or was she being pulled into something too good to be true? Louise, sitting quietly in her chair, finally spoke as though reading Danielle's thoughts. "Not every blessing comes with strings, baby," she said, her voice calm but certain. Some are real. The question is whether you're ready to believe that. Danielle sank into the couch beside her, pressing her palms together. It just doesn't make sense, Grandma. Why us? Why me? Louise smiled faintly, eyes wise with years of hardship. Because sometimes the right person notices when kindness is rare, and they remember it. Maybe this is God's way of giving back what you've poured out all these years. Still, doubt lingered like a shadow. Danielle imagined two futures playing in her mind like overlapping films. One where she said no, where she kept grinding through 12-hour shifts, scraping by, always one step from falling behind, and another where she said yes, and the doors she had always pressed her nose against finally opened wide. One future was safe, predictable in its pain. The other was terrifying in its possibility. By evening, exhaustion tugged at her, but sleep refused to come. When her phone buzzed on the nightstand, she expected another nosy text from a coworker. But when she turned it over, her heart stumbled. A message from an unknown number, short, simple, unmistakably him. It was good meeting you today. Take your time. She stared at the words until they blurred, a strange mix of comfort and pressure settling in her chest. He wasn't pushing, but somehow the absence of pressure made her decision feel even more urgent. Later that night, Caleb found her in the kitchen, staring at the same stack of bills she had been staring at all day. "You always told me not to. Play scared," he said, voice firmer now. "Isn't that what you're doing? Playing scared?" His words pierced deeper than he realized. Danielle looked at her little brother, seeing the boy she had raised after their mother's passing, the boy whose future she had sworn to protect. He deserved more than hand-me-down cleats and second-hand textbooks. He deserved a chance to dream. Louise shuffled into the room, her presence steady and grounding. She placed a hand on Danielle's shoulder and spoke quietly. "Fear is how you know it matters, baby. If it didn't scare you, it wouldn't be worth doing." Danielle felt tears sting her eyes. Between her grandmother's wisdom and her brother's conviction, the walls she had built around her doubts began to crumble. Still, the decision was hers to make, and hers alone. Hours later, after her hospital shift ended and the night air pressed heavy around her, Danielle sat in her car in the empty parking lot. The city was quiet, and the dashboard clock glowed, a dull green. William's card sat on the passenger seat, its edges worn from her constant fidgeting. She picked it up, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb, her hands trembling. Her breath hitched as she unlocked her phone and dialed the number. Each ring stretched endlessly, and for a moment she prayed it would go to voicemail. That fate would spare her from the choice. But then his voice answered, warm and steady. She swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. "I don't know what's going to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking with both fear and hope. "But I want to try." There was a pause, then William's tone softened into something almost relieved. "That's all I needed to hear." And in that simple exchange, the weight of her choice lifted, replaced by something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The possibility that life as she knew it was about to change forever. Weeks slipped by, and the weight that had pressed on Danielle's shoulders for years began to lift in ways she had never dared to imagine. The first sign came in a simple envelope delivered to her apartment. Tuition covered in full, her name written neatly on the acceptance slip. For the first time, she walked into her college classroom without the burden of wondering how she would pay for the semester, without the quiet humiliation of juggling overdue bills against her future. Her textbooks arrived without her chasing second-hand copies or pleading with professors for leniency. She sat at her desk with her head high, her mind clear, realizing she could finally focus on learning instead of surviving. At home, the changes were just as striking. Caleb bounded across the football field in brand-new cleats that gleamed under the stadium lights. The boy who once played with patched-up shoes and taped laces now sprinted with confidence, scouts in the stands taking notes as whistles blew. His laughter rang louder, his shoulders straighter, as though the world had finally agreed to give him a fair shot. Danielle sat in the bleachers, clutching her grandmother's hand, her eyes brimming with pride. Louise, too, carried herself differently. The sharp lines of worry that had carved into her face began to soften. Her medicine cabinet, once a collection of empty bottles and carefully rationed pills, now stood full and organized. No longer did she have to choose between groceries and prescriptions. No longer did she sit awake at night worrying about what would happen if she couldn't stretch the last of her medication. She smiled more, her laughter echoing through their small apartment in a way Danielle hadn't heard in years. Through it all, Danielle waited for the catch. Some hidden contract, some demand waiting in the shadows. But William never called with conditions. He never sent anyone with paperwork. He had kept his word, pure and simple. No strings, no expectations, only an open door. The realization struck her deeply one evening as she sat alone in the kitchen, the glow of the lamp warm against the silence. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she wasn't living in someone else's dream. This was her reality now. Of course, the community noticed. Neighbors who once whispered about her struggles now whispered for different reasons. Some were envious, muttering about luck or chance, while others were quietly inspired. Parents pointed Danielle out to their children as proof that good deeds didn't go unnoticed. At the hospital, co-workers stared with a mix of curiosity and awe, asking cautious questions, half expecting her to reveal some secret bargain she had struck. But Danielle simply smiled and said little. It wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about embracing the gift without guilt. At first, guilt had clung to her like a second skin. She replayed the moment at the gas station over and over, convincing herself she hadn't earned what followed, that she had simply stumbled into fortune she didn't deserve. But with time, she learned to let go. She came to understand that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was a form of strength, an acknowledgement that sometimes kindness flowed both ways. By embracing the opportunity, she honored not just herself but also William's intention. One evening, as the family gathered around the table, Louise's laughter mingled with Caleb's excited stories of practice. Danielle looked at them both and realized that her single act of generosity had rippled outward, changing not one life, but three. Her own future opened wide before her. Caleb's path stretched toward possibilities he once thought impossible, and Louise could finally rest with peace instead of worry. And somewhere in the city, William sat in his office looking out at the skyline, holding on to the memory of a young nurse who had handed him $60 without hesitation. For him, the gift wasn't money or balance sheets. It was proof. Proof that humanity still existed, that even in a world clouded by greed and self-interest, there were still people who gave without expecting anything in return. In the quiet of her thoughts, Danielle often returned to that night at the gas station. A simple choice, $60 she thought she couldn't spare, had rewritten the course of her family's life. It reminded her of something she wanted everyone to remember. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can carry the greatest weight. Sometimes it takes just $60 to change everything. Never underestimate the power of a small kindness, and as this chapter of her life closed and another began, one truth echoed above all others. If Danielle's story moved you, remember, one story, one choice, one act of kindness can change everything. For more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.